Okay, great. I thought I would start by telling you a little story on Connie. We had Monday night at my house, we had this big meeting. There were a whole group of people there. And I had written a note to everybody who was coming, and I said, let's focus the meeting tonight on the notion of right attitude. And it was great. I mean, it just gave everybody a focus. This was a meeting of what's called the Savika order. And it doesn't matter. It's just the next, I mean, it matters a great deal, but it's the next level of commitment that certain people make to Ananda. And the Savika order is quite big, but we have these every other month meetings. I don't know, 10, 15 of us come. But we were talking about right attitude, and it was very, actually deep and sweet meeting. But Connie was telling a story about, she used to work at one point in her life, she and her husband, who were both naturopathic physicians, worked for an insurance company. And people would call in and they'd be looking for a naturopathic answer to something or some medical problem, and Connie and her husband would answer the phone. Now, the point Connie was trying to make to us is that she would use a flower essence, right? And she would, like, every time the phone rang, because people would be angry or upset, you know, they'd have trouble getting through to the insurance company, nobody would answer their call. Nobody wanted to answer their call because they were angry, so it just was feeding itself. Connie said, but I would take a few drops of a certain flower essence, doesn't matter what it was, and I'd answer the phone. Then it would ring again, and I'd take a few drops. And finally, somebody said in the room, aren't those flower essences made in alcohol? Connie would be totally calm. I'm actually just teasing about her a little bit because, you know, obviously there was not enough alcohol in there. Although, this is a very interesting thing. When I used to drink wine, which I actually loved, I've never had a problem with alcohol in my life. I mean, I never did. And I loved wine. But I always noticed, and I had no idea what this meant, but this is the truth. I would take one sip of wine. It would touch my lips. And I would say, all my friends knew this, I would say, I absolutely feel totally different. And they would say, that's ridiculous. You haven't even swallowed any of it yet. And I'd say, I know, but I'm telling you, the minute the wine got near me, something changed in me. And I was never a big drinker because I never liked that feeling of getting lost. But I did like the feeling of a glass of wine. I particularly liked the taste of a glass of wine in those days. But it wasn't until I met Connie many, many years later. I think I did tell you the story last week of meeting her. And I started learning more about homeopathic medicine than what those of us who know nothing about homeopathy think it is. We have no idea. But as I started spending time with Connie and I started understanding energy, and the point she was making tonight with one of the flower essences where she said, you could drink a whole bottle of this stuff, but the truth is that as soon as you take a drop, or in this instance she was saying 3, but something changes because its energy has come in and totally shifted your energy. The effect is huge with whatever these homeopathic remedies are when it's the right remedy. And that dawned on me then years later, long after I'd quit drinking any alcohol, that that's what was happening to me with that alcohol. I would take just the tiniest little sip, or not, literally the glass would hit my lips, and everything about, I could feel such a profound change. It is really remarkable how subtle energy is, and I think Connie did such an amazing job of presenting this. It probably will shorten my talk quite a bit tonight, depending on where I go with it. I'd like to talk about it eventually from a little more practical, here we are in our body, how do we move? How do we use this to begin to make change? And what does that mean? This whole thing with Dr. Emoto and the water, which obviously a lot of you have read about and know about. I remember the first time I heard about it, the implication was so profound to me, not just looking at the pictures. That's remarkable that somebody figured out how to photograph water in its crystalline form, that in and of itself. Nobody ever knew water existed in crystals, We knew there were three ways that water could exist, right? Liquid, steam, ice, that was it. But he knew this, and he got it, and then that he could demonstrate with such subtle changes of energy. But when it hit me that we're actually a little over 2/3 water, so that every time I would either be walking down the street and I would say to myself, God, look at that person wearing those plaid pants and that orange shirt. You know, what did they like get up this morning and look in the mirror and think, oh, this is beautiful? I'd be doing running this trip in my head. Or just, constantly commenting on people. And when I saw his work at first, it really so clarified for me this whole notion of energy. I was just sick about all the people that I had had those thoughts about, or how many times I had told people they were wrong about something, sometimes even with the best intention, but where you try and push somebody a little further than they're ready to go, which is never a help. It just shuts people down. Of course it does. Then I had these images of what their water molecules looked like. I mean, I was sick about what I had been doing because, and Connie said it, we have to realize every single thought that we have. It doesn't need to be words. We don't need to do something mean. Every thought that we have is so powerful. It is equally powerful to the word or the deed because energy just exists. It's not actually more or less subtle. It exists in the same form everywhere, as we talked about last week. And it's all originates in thought, as Connie said. So it just grabbed me. It really changed me. And now, every time I find myself doing that, I mean, long ago did I quit commenting on people's clothes, plaid pants or whatever. But anytime I start to have a negative thought, and it's there, the thought's there. You know that story in Autobiography of a Yogi where a master's meditating with Sri Yukteswar, and there's a mosquito that's bothering him, and he decides he's going to kill the mosquito. But as he comes out of meditation and goes to move, he thinks better of it, that he shouldn't commit that act of violence. And Sri Yukteswar says to him, without moving or opening his eyes, why don't you just complete the act? And Master says, Master meaning Yogananda, for those of you who don't know, he said, but I didn't even hurt him. And Sri Yukteswar said, you thought about killing him, you may as well just do it. I mean, it was so powerful when you get that. So at least now, when I have the thought, it goes like this, and then I say, okay, I know that happened, but then I say to myself, Shanti, look at that person. You are looking at Divine Mother. You are looking at a perfect manifestation of God. And I do this as often as I can remember. Open my heart and just send love to that person in whatever way I can. Positive thoughts. I notice them as being beautiful. And I just do this constantly. I mean, how else can we change? If we sit here and think, whoa, what am I going to do? Every thought. You know how many thoughts we have? Is it 17,000 in a minute? It's something like that. It's some astronomical number, whatever it is. All those thoughts, we can't control all those thoughts. It's ridiculous. But if we can remind ourselves as often in a day as we possibly can to draw our energy up to the point between our eyebrows, if we can just remember to look up, it just changes everything. And it changes everything for everyone around us. There's a wonderful quote in a book, which I do think I mentioned here a couple weeks ago, called Callings by Greg Lavoie. There's two books that I have that I don't do this anymore, but I used to read parts of them for years and years and years before I would ever give a talk. One was this book, Callings, because it was just so filled with wisdom. And another book was called The Miracle of Change. Both books, I think, are out of print, but both obtainable for 99 cents, if you'd like, at Amazon. But they're fabulous books. And one of the quotes that I think came from Collings is a quote that says something like, getting well is a journey. It's an experience. It's not an event. We don't just get well. It's not like we do that and it's over and done. It's a journey that we're on. And the least little step that we take on our journey, and this is the hopeful, wonderful part of it, just the least little step in the right direction ever just gets us that much closer to where we're going. It's all perfect, just reminding ourselves gently, being gentle. No, get back on the path, get back on the path. Keep your attention focused in an upward direction. That line that we say every Sunday in our festival, even a little practice of this inward religion will free you from dire fears and colossal consequences. It's just such a beautiful line from the reading. It's from the Gita, actually, from the Bhagavad Gita, but it's incorporated into our festival. Even a little practice of this inward religion will free you from dire fears and colossal consequences. It's huge when you let this sink in. And you remember last week I was saying to you, you hear this stuff, and it just sounds so otherworldly. It's so out of the box that we live in that it's very easy for the mind, without us realizing it, to write it off. But we should keep taking these sayings that we repeat all the time, every time, just to go deeper and deeper with it. Deeper means just absorb it, because even saying that line over and over, or like Connie was saying when she put that signature of Masters with blessing, Swami Yogananda, and when she said what it means to look at it, for years and years and years, I had a picture of his with that writing of his on my altar. It's not there now. Just looking, he wrote that. That is so powerful to be in the presence of that. You know, when Swami met him the very first day, and he said to Swamiji, "Did you like the book? What did you think of the autobiography of a yogi?" And Swami said, "Well, I loved it. I got on a bus and rode out here in 3 nights. I loved that book." And Master said, "Yes, it has my vibration in it." You know, Swami had picked up some copy. It wasn't like the copy that Master himself had held in his hand. And Swami said later, he said, "I didn't know what that meant. I had no idea. What does that mean? Vibration." You know, he would just have no idea about it. But now, here we are, we talk about vibration and we talk about energy. And Connie helped us start back to talk about what is energy. And I just want to make one other point about energy before we move on to talk about how do we use all of what Connie talked about tonight? How do we bring it to life to have its healing effect? You know, what does healing mean? Healing means finding our way back to that place where we remember that we're one with God. Remember, that's the whole purpose of life. That's why we're here. Whether we're conscious of it or not doesn't change the fact. This is why souls incarnate, because they continuously long for that oneness with their original home in the divine. That beautiful saying by, I can't remember this saint right now. One of you will know it, and nor will I exactly remember the quote, but the quote basically says, "You made us in your image, you infused our heart with your energy, and our hearts will not quit longing for you until we find our way home again." That's a horrible re-saying of what is a beautiful quote. It's so bad that I might have to bring you the quote next week. But it tells a story anyway. We're all longing. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about healing. Master said there can't be any dis-ease other than how we're out of harmony with that central unity, that place of oneness with the divine. Remember, I think I talked last week about how the word centered came around in the 60s. I don't know if I mentioned it here, but you know, it was in the 60s where we started talking about being centered, and it means living in that astral spine, which is as real as any anatomical part that we have. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about healing. It doesn't mean one thing if you heal something on your body, if you're not healing yourself energetically. Because it's just like the old children's game, Jack in the Box. You'll push it down here, and it's just going to pop up somewhere else. And you can push it down there, and it'll come up somewhere else until we heal ourselves from an energetic perspective, or as long as we're moving in that direction, we're doing the right thing. But we can never just treat the body. For years and years, I had a practice of asking people, this was many years ago. I can't even imagine how I knew to do this now that I think about it, because I remember doing it when I was still a nurse, and I was in the coronary care unit, and I remember in those days, this is how long ago this was, when somebody had a heart attack, they would stay in these coronary care units, which were brand new. They were only devised in the 60s, for 7 to 10 days, and they were not allowed to move. You had to feed them, you had to shave them, bathe them. I mean, now you have a heart attack and you're out of bed and doing all that the next day, literally. I mean, it is what happens. But in those days, so that's how long ago it was. But somehow I used to say to people all the time, why do you think this happened? What do you think is going on? And it was such a disarming yet genuine question that I found that people just answered it, literally. Somebody would say to me, and these are real stories, you know, my heart's been aching recently. My son died, and this was the anniversary of his death, and my heart's just been aching. You know, why did you have this heart attack, I would say, in essence. But gently and lovingly. I remember one time a man came into an emergency room where I was working, and he had a laceration. And I just said the same thing to him. I used to do it a lot, as I say. Why did this happen? And without a beat's pause, this guy off the streets starts telling me exactly why he had to cut himself that day. It's fascinating, you know. So most people would just see that as somebody who came into the emergency room with a laceration. You sew them up, you send them on their way. But who knows if we hadn't had that talk, which was ultimately what was healing in that something else would have happened to that person. I can't tell you how many times in my practice of medicine, because I have a practice of always doing complete histories on everybody. Now, if I'm working in an urgent care clinic and I have 15 minutes, I don't necessarily ask everybody about their relationships with their partners and their children, and et cetera. But I always ask them a few personal questions. I always try and get to know them. But in my own practice, where there's time, I ask people questions that most physicians or even healers of any type just wouldn't ask. So I ask people, how are you in your relationship? How are things at home? You know, are you guys still sexually active? How's that going for you? How are the kids doing? Where are you with regard to anything about religion or spirituality? How many times when I've asked people, were you ever abused? Probably 30 times in my career. That's a lot. Who's ever sitting on the other side of me has burst out in tears and said to me, nobody has ever asked me that, and then told me the whole story. And by the very sharing of the story, people are able to heal. They could have come in to see me or anybody else for any reason. What's going on with this body is at some very gross and obvious level. But if we don't figure out how to begin to move and change energy, nothing will ever change. So, as Connie said over and over, all of the thoughts, and I'm going to talk about some of which she talked about, the music we listen to. What do affirmations really mean? We were talking again at this meeting on Monday, again because it was about right attitude. And I told a story. There's a woman who's been part of Ananda. Just want to be careful about, let me just think about this for a moment. I remember the story, but I'm trying to decide if it's an appropriate story to tell. I think I'm going to pass on that story. because this will be listened to and observed and probably not the best story to tell. But I will say this, you can hold very strong, clear feelings about somebody in life for a very long time, and you can justify them. And often they're justifiable. Often they are. Today, I was working with a woman in my office who was abused by her two older brothers, sexually abused when she was a child. And she came in, and we've been talking about it for a couple of weeks, and she'll keep seeing me. And there's no way in the world that anybody wouldn't understand her pain about that. To be violated in those ways is just excruciatingly painful, and then not to have any way to clear it up. It's complicated. On the other hand, I know for sure, I absolutely know for sure, that as soon as she is able to expand and hold her brothers in a place of love, she will see things about them and know things about them that she's never seen or known before. They have grown up now, this was many, many years ago, to be wonderful men. Maybe they're generous, maybe they're loving, who knows. But as long as we can't see it and we hold somebody in a particular light, that just has to be who they are. We're holding them captive in a kind of way. I will share a story with you that a couple of you have probably heard me tell about a woman who came to see me in my practice many, many years ago. And please, somebody in this room stop me if I told this story last week. She walked into my office. This is how I met her. And she walked into the door, and she sat down, and without saying hello to me, without anything, she said, I just want to tell you, I hate doctors. I don't like any doctor. I don't go to doctors. Literally, this is not an exaggeration. I already don't like you, she said. I hadn't opened, not a word, nothing had come out of my mouth. And she said, I'm only here, and she proceeds to tell me this story, that she's a woman in her 60s, she had had some abnormal vaginal bleeding for a year, and she had done nothing about it because she hates doctors. By the way, when she quit ranting at me, it took a few minutes. As soon as she was done telling me how much she hated being there, I just stayed very calm, and I looked at her and I said, hi, my name's Shanti, and I held out my hand. I figured, what are we going to do? And nothing I'm saying to you today is an exaggeration. This is a true story. So she tells me this story about the bleeding, and just the day before she came to see me, she had seen a gynecologist. She said to me, I was in the office for 10 minutes. That's it. She told me I had an inoperable cancer, and she wanted to get me on hospice. She did an exam, very quick exam, told me I had an inoperable tumor, and she wanted to put me on hospice. Now, maybe she was exaggerating. Maybe she was there for 15 minutes. Maybe she was there for 20. But it sounded like a horrific experience. My heart just ached for this woman, and I was a little irritated with the doctor. And I believed her that it was some version of that. So she said to me, and I'm here because I've heard good things about you, and I want to know, can you tell me, is that the truth? Now, I hadn't touched this woman. We were just sitting there talking. So I said to her, how about if I do this? Let me do a history on you. Let me do a physical exam, and we'll decide how we want to go from here. How could I possibly tell you? I was with that woman for an hour and a half, and I will tell you that 20 times in that hour and a half, she told me how much she hates her husband. She just kept repeating it every chance that she had. She couldn't stand him. She's been waiting to leave him for years. Oh, now this, she says, the kids are grown, and I was just getting ready to leave him, which of course was probably not the case. She was in her 60s. She probably had many opportunities to leave. But she was just enraged with him, and she couldn't quite tell me why. So at the end of the visit, I said, look, I felt this tumor, but I said, I don't know that much about it. I felt immediately what the gynecologist felt, that I would never, ever say that to somebody on a first visit. But I said, let's get a CAT scan, and let's do some tests, and let me speak to some specialists, and let's make an appointment for you to come back in 3 weeks. Just giving her time, because I could have had all that information in 2 days. But as she was getting ready to leave, I said to her, I want to give you an assignment. And I wrote on a prescription pad, you have to go home and say 3 nice things a day to your husband. And she looked at me, she goes, now that's not going to be easy. So I said, no, I didn't say it would be easy, but I think you ought to do it. She looks at me, she goes, what would you expect me to say? Just like this. I said, I don't know. I said, look, you told me you're furious with him because he works a lot and he's never home. In the meantime, I'm thinking, good God, of course he's never home. I mean, she's really a difficult lady. And I said, maybe one of the things could be that every time he's home, you go up and you hug him. And you say, honey, I am so happy that you are here for me. And she was like, oh. And I said, why don't you do this? Why don't you get into acting? You become an actress. Even if you're not feeling it, just become an actress like you're acting like you love this man. And then you come up with 2 other things. So she, with a lot of very difficult energy, grabs her things. We made the appointment and she leaves. And I don't know if Connie remembers, but I walked out to the front desk and I said, I don't think that lady's coming back here. So she's gone, but 3 weeks later she comes back. Honestly, you have to hear this is an exactly true story. So she comes in, and I told her, I said, look, the tumor really has grown. In medical terms, I told her what's happened. And I said, you have some choices to make. We could try and do a little radiation and shrink it. And I don't know that we could cure it. I don't think we can, but we could buy you a little time. And here's another choice. I said, or I could just help you through whatever you need to go through with the tumor. But I think you ought to think about that. And, I was very calm with her. And then I said to her, after whatever that took, 15, 20 minutes, how are things at home? And she says to me, great, why? And I said to her, are you serious? And she said, yeah. And I said, Mari, you were in here 3 weeks ago telling me over and over and over how much you hated your husband. She said, just like this, oh my God, Dr. Rubenstone, she says. She said, when I left here, I was mad at you. I said, I know. She said, I didn't think I was ever coming back. I said, neither did I. She said, I was so mad at you that when I left, I decided to prove you wrong. So I decided to do what you were asking to prove you wrong. She said within 3 days, everything changed at home. Everything. Her husband immediately went on sick leave, but with unending sick leave. I forget what that's called. He took a leave of absence for as long as he needed. And she said, he has not left my side. She said, we have literally fallen in love. Those were her words. And, I helped that woman die. I used to go to her home a lot. She died 3 months later. I've helped a lot of people die because of what I do, and it's been my karma. I've rarely seen any 2 people go through anything like that in a more beautiful way. What happened? How could that be? Energy heals. Energy heals. It's remarkable what happens when we change our mind, when we decide that we can look at something just a little differently. And of course we have to be ready. We can't do these things until we're ready. But it doesn't take time. We shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking that it's about time. That's why a drop of a flower essence means what it does, because it's instantaneous. It is like putting a drop of food color into a bucket of water. It doesn't take a quart of food coloring to change the color of a bucket of water. 1 drop, everything changes. Remember, color's energy too. Everything's energy. It's so remarkable. Even a little practice of this inward religion, you turn the person who you're having trouble with. There is this peace and harmony prayer that Ananda started spreading around. I think it was Ananda. It could have started with Devi. It doesn't matter. But where when you're having trouble with somebody, you say this peace and harmony prayer 3 times a day. There's actually a way that you do it for a certain number of minutes. Hold this person in peace and harmony. Hold them in peace and harmony. Then you say about yourself for a minute or a minute and a half, hold Shanti in peace and harmony. Ananda has been collecting stories about the dramatic changes that happen in people's life. There was a woman who came to see me about a year ago. She knew she was going to be let go from her job. She just couldn't get over being angry about it. She was just furious about it. She's actually this meek, kind of soft-spoken, sweet little thing. She came into my office here, the church that day. She was mad. And she said, I've been like this for months. She said, I'm so furious that they weren't seeing who she was, that they were getting ready to let her go. She knew it. They hadn't approached her yet. I gave her the peace and harmony prayer, the way to do it. And she went home, and she called me the next day. She said, I can't even believe this myself. I cannot believe it. I started doing the peace and harmony prayer, and suddenly everybody is being so nice to me. They didn't change. You know, what is it that changes when we do things like that? It's energy. You know, I know we talked about this last week. Every single bit of energy has a positive and a negative pole, you know? And you know, if you see something that's not like a bar of steel, that's not magnetized, those protons and electrons are just scattered all over the place. Energy's just going wherever it wants to go. You bring it up next to a magnet, and what happens? Immediately all of the protons go to one end, all of the electrons go to the other. This is true, right? And suddenly that bar has a magnetism. And when something is magnetized, it draws things to it. Depending on which end of the bar you hold out, it draws things. That's us. We are magnetic bars walking around. And if we're not paying attention to how it is we magnetize ourselves, to what, to whom, to what music we're listening to. You know, and I have a habit of writing prescriptions that are unusual. And and the work I do, you know, I mean, of course I write for penicillin and, you know, cough medicine and other things too. But I could just as easily and way more often write a prescription for somebody to go down to East West and find Lee, who buys all the music down there, and say, Shanti sent this person, please sell them some inspired music. Just that. Send them inspired music. Sell them. Lee and I, now we know, I've known Lee for years. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be Masters or Swami's music, although it often is. But there are other people who channel music where the music is inspired. Some time ago, I read the better part of this extraordinary book called Conversations with, or Talks with Great Musicians. I think it's called Talks with Great Musicians. And there's a man who went in the late 1800s and he interviewed Brahms. It's extraordinary if you just even read the first 50 pages of this book. And he was talking to Brahms about himself and about Beethoven. And he was asking him, he said, I've heard you say that you hear this music, the music comes to you. And he was asking him what it means. And Brahms was able to describe in the most beautiful words, it's been a while since I've read it, but he said, you know, you can go get an advanced degree in music and you learn how to write notes and timing of music. And he said, that's not what makes great music. He said, in fact, if you really want to write great music, you have to forget most of what you've learned because it's nothing that can come from your mind. He said, it's when you transcend the mind, when you go beyond mind. He told a couple of very cute stories. In those days, this was the late 1800s, he said, we always refer to that as going into our subconscious, meaning out of our conscious mind. And he said, we ought to begin to call this superconscious. This is what he said in 1890. I mean, nobody was using those words. It was just amazing. He said somebody yelled at Beethoven one time for writing such a complicated piece. And it was a violinist, maybe it was one of his violin concertos or something, I don't know. And the guy said, this is just impossible to play. And everybody who was in this little group of the people who were talking, this is in 1890, knew this story. Apparently Beethoven became enraged and he screamed at the top of his lungs, when I was writing that piece, I was in touch with God himself. He was giving me that music. Do you think I cared about your puny little violin, he just screamed. Very interesting, to hear. So when I say, it's interesting because I don't often think of all classical music as being inspired. By the way, I think most of it isn't. I do think the fact that Mozart wrote a symphony at the age of 5 says a huge amount. Now, we know for sure that Mozart he didn't even just write a few notes that happened to sound good. Literally, he wrote his first symphony at the age of 5. Where does that come from? How is that possible? It has nothing to do with mind. So that kind of music that we hear from some place that is way beyond mind is music that is attuned to something so much greater than we are. That's where it's coming from. So if we sit and listen to that music, if we buy a CD of Swamiji chanting Om over and over and over, and we play it in our home constantly as background, it's almost imperceptible to the ear, but it's the energy of Om playing all the time. I was just talking to Heidi before class tonight because she's been coming to some meetings in my house. I live in the community. It just happens to be a very nice space that I was given. It's a little larger than some of the other places, and somebody knocked out 2 walls and put windows there, so it brought in a little more light. But I said to her, this home has just about never had a television on inside of it. No music has ever been played in that place other than Swami or Master's music or other inspired music. Everybody comes there to meditate. And if I'm home alone, I very often will be having Om playing. Everybody walks into that space. This has nothing to do with me. This is not about me. Everybody walks in, everybody, and says, it feels so good in here. What is it? It's really using energy, raising the energy, allowing it to expand, making sure that the television's not on every night, that there's no violent shows going on in there, that we're not playing, you saw what happened with this heavy metal music, and that's real. Those things are real. That's what happens to that energy. So it's just, we laugh, we play, there's a lot of fun that goes on there, but the energy is vibrating in a very fine way. And that's been done consciously. That's why it's so good to meditate. Why do we feel so great when we walk into certain churches or synagogues? I often tell people when they're taking a beginning meditation class here, just sitting in this room, and I'm always aware that everybody's sitting and listening and looking at those masters. And just this Sunday, I was sitting at service, of course, sitting up front here, and I just decided all of service, because it's very unusual, I always sit in the same chair every Sunday, the first seat on the aisle. Anybody who's here knows. But this Sunday, something happened when all of the light bearers walked out, and I sat in the furthest seat over. I was in front of you for the first time, I thought of it. And so I was right in front of Master. And I said, I'm just going to sit here like this through the whole service, and I'm going to absorb this vibration because it matters. Remember last week we were talking about wearing different colored clothing. And that matters because color has energy, and energy changes us. And I said that. But it's absolutely as true about the music we listen to, as Connie said, about the thoughts that we have, So when I was told many years ago that no matter how irritated I was with my husband and how sure I was that I should end that marriage right then, and I had all my reasons, literally I had an inspiration that I've often called a spiritual epiphany. It came to me, you're not going anywhere, Shanti. He's yours. As long as you and he are in the body in this life, he's here. And since you don't like staying where the energy's not good, what are you going to do about that? And I wasn't thinking this through. The next thing came. Every time you look in his eyes, Some of you just realize how hard this might seem if you're in your right mind. Thank goodness I knew it was an inspiration. It had nothing to do with me. You will see nothing but God. You will always see, every time you look at him, you will see Divine Mother looking back at you. And I knew it to be true. It was the truth. And then the message came, you will never see anything wrong with him again. Whoa. I thought, I mean, maybe if you're on your deathbed and you have a few minutes, you might accomplish that. But what if there happens to be 20 years? But I knew that it was coming from some other place. So what happens if every time you look at somebody, everybody, you say, I'm looking at God, I'm looking at God, I'm looking right at Divine Mother, because it's the truth. And it immediately changes everything. This is my own story, and I don't want to take too much time, no more time than I've already told you. But I had the same exact experience, and I don't often think of it this way because I just told you that other story about Mari. I never said a word to Barry about that when it happened. It happened late at night one time. We were on the phone. He was still living on the East Coast. We lived bi-coastally for the first 20 years of our marriage. He lived on the East Coast. I lived out here. But anyway, there we were. And I never said a word to him about it. But within 3 days, everything about that man, not everything, I don't want to say that, something so profound started to change in him. And I realized that my thoughts were holding him where he was. I realized that even though we had both agreed for many years, we had both agreed that he was difficult and I was easier, that I was such a good wife, such a good partner. We both said this. He was hard. That was totally bogus. That had nothing to do with anything. Because as soon as I saw him as divine, he was able to expand. It's like I had my hands on him, and I was literally pushing him into this tiny little space where I held him. You're difficult in this way, you're difficult in that way, you don't know this, you can't do that. It's amazing when I realized how much of that was running. Because honestly, if you met us as a couple, there was so much love, and I was a good lady. But now I'm condensing it, and I'm telling you all the time, this is wrong, that's wrong, don't do this, you don't do that. And suddenly he could become something other. We have that amazing ability because people can't break out of where our thoughts are. This is so profound. Connie started talking about affirmations. It's an amazing way to begin this path because it's, as I said earlier, it's very hard. You can't imagine how many thoughts you have, and you're never going to stop them. Swamiji said over and over and over, don't think you're going to solve all of your problems by solving this problem, then that problem. My goodness, it would take us the next 1,000,000 lifetimes if we think about how much sort of downward pulling energy there is. You know, in the Bhagavad Gita, with the two armies that are fighting each other, the Kauravas are thought of as the bad guys. And really, they represent, I don't want to talk too much about the Gita, but they represent all of those qualities in ourselves that take us off center. Our judgmentalness, our greed, our neediness, you can just keep talking about it, our love of the material world, it just, whatever. You could go on and on. And what's very interesting is that they're unnumbered. In the Gita, we know exactly how many good brothers there are. We know that. There's 5 of them. That's it. But the Kauravas are unnumbered. So when I say if we were going to go after every one of those qualities, well, it would just be impossible. Even though eventually that is our job. That's what happens when Arjuna says, I don't want to fight. I can't kill these people. These are my cousin brothers, he said. Because in India, that's what it was like. If somebody was your cousin, they were your brother. Families just lived so closely. And Arjuna says to Krishna, I won't do it. I won't kill them. Can't we find some other way? And Krishna says, in no uncertain terms, if you don't do this, if you don't kill every one of them, this is a righteous war. Everybody will suffer from this moment forward. Meaning, if we don't keep on this path of trying to heal ourselves, of trying to be more in tune with our divine self, if we don't keep working at it, we'll just keep being drawn out. We can't hardly allow the ego any room because it doesn't know about a little room. It likes to have the run of the place. That's its nature. So you give it a little space and it'll take over. So I started to say about affirmations, which are an amazing healing tool. They really only work with energy in the form of words, or that's what our chants are very often. That's why we repeat them over and over and over. Reveal thyself, reveal thyself, reveal thyself. Not quite an affirmation, but it's close. It's the same thing till we become that. When we're writing an affirmation, as Connie said, it can't be wishy-washy. We can't afford to be iffy in life with our energy. If you are thinking, maybe I can, maybe I can't, gee, I'm not sure, you don't really make any progress. How is it that people do things like lift a car off of a child, or these other feats that we hear of that really happen with Herculean and impossible, humanly impossible strength? They take all of their energy and they aim it in the same direction. We have to. That's when we're saying, I can, I will. We don't say, I can't, or I don't think so, or well, maybe. That has no power. That's what Connie demonstrated that. But when we say, I will, that says a lot. And just by saying that, literally, it starts realigning our molecules and drawing them up our spine. It's a different magnetic energy. So when you find your affirmation, whatever it is, I know when I've been trying to help people quit smoking, this is not inspired, but it works. It doesn't matter. I say to them, I want you to start writing 5 minutes a day. Write 5 minutes. I love being tobacco-free. I love being tobacco-free. I love being tobacco-free. And when the voice comes in that starts saying, no, you don't. You want a cigarette right now. I said, just gently push it away. Just keep writing. I love being tobacco-free. Now, I can't say to everybody, talk about energy and the astral spine and what we're doing and what it means to change our mind with these affirmations. But it is so unbelievably powerful to have that kind of right attitude, energy heading in the right direction, always. This isn't just a psychological thing. We're talking to a group of yogis here. We're talking about the whole time we're doing this, as much as possible, keeping our energy focused at the point between the eyebrows. And we have pages of affirmations that Yogananda and Kriyananda have written, pages of them. So I keep them in the office, as does Connie, and I'll say to somebody, why don't you choose one that resonates with you? Why don't you choose it? Or if somebody's saying, I'm exhausted, I can't get out of bed, I don't know what's wrong with me, no other doctor has been able to find anything wrong, I write them a prescription. And on the prescription, I write, within me lies the energy to accomplish all that I will to do. Behind my every act is God's infinite power. And I say to them, write this 5 minutes a day. Really? And people look at me and they go, really? Yeah, start writing it 5 minutes a day. But I did this about a year and a half ago. I asked my husband, I said, do me a favor, if not yourself. Find an affirmation here and start writing it. And about 2 days later, he said to me, if you ever try and quote me on this, I'll swear you were a liar. He said, but this is unbelievable. It's changing me in days if we decide that we really want to change. So having an affirmation, and they're easy to find. As Connie said, there are a lot of them in scientific healing affirmations. That's what they are. But there are many other affirmations. And in fact, next week, the last week of this class, we're going to talk about technique. Affirmation will be one of them, the last, not next week, but the week after. And I'm going to bring them to you. I'll bring you these pages because they're not like I love being tobacco-free. They carry the master's vibrations when they're affirmations that have come through Yogananda or Kriyananda. Totally different energy to them. So much better for those of us who are open to it, to use one of their affirmations. People always say to me, well, can I make up my own? And if that's all they can do right now, I'll say to them, sure, make up your own. But as soon as they're ready to take one of these that are filled with energy, it's going to have a totally different effect on them. Master used to say, it's so important to smile that if you're somebody who doesn't smile, you should stand in front of the mirror 3 times a day and hold the corners of your mouth up. That's what he said. And he was serious. It sounds funny, doesn't it? But he would say, go in front of the mirror and smile. Remember last week I told you that I've begun to notice how many people's foreheads are creased? Like they're always like this. They're always trying to think or they're scowling. You'll be mad at me if you start looking at people because then you can't stop it. It's like hearing a song or humming a tune. But it's remarkable. And if you try and help those people, or right now we're talking about ourselves really, to just start smiling more often. Just do that. Again, molecules start rearranging. Every water molecule in our body, every proton, every electron, smaller units of energy than we can possibly imagine happen. Last night I gave a class at East West on love, and it was really remarkable for me to think about how do we love somebody well? What does that mean, actually? Because, I certainly will not end this class on a downward note, but the vast majority of people that I've met who come into my life, both as a physician or as a friend, will tell me ultimately in one way or another that they're not sure they've ever been loved well. It's hard to love somebody well. It means stepping completely outside of yourself and noticing who they are and what they need next to take their next step on their path, not on your path, not when you're sure that you know better than they do what's good for them. None of that. But as I was making that list, which I'm not going to go over tonight, but which was the substance in certain ways of this talk last night, it really touched me how many of those things, those ways that we can get conscious about loving, are ways that rearrange energy, that do exactly what we're talking about tonight, that open our heart, that draw energy here so that we're moving with the consciousness of our heart, not the consciousness of our mind. And what a dramatic difference that makes in how we feel as we move through life and how we affect people. We're talking, the whole substance of the class tonight is energy heals. So if we just keep holding that in mind, and we're talking about all of these different ways that we have of rearranging energy, sound, light. Remember last week Connie told you about getting that light that they could put different color filters on in their retreat that they have in Hawaii? What would happen if we think about, or I always look up at these, I forget what they're called, but that beautiful purple and blue light that shines behind these words of Yogananda in his poem Samadhi. So it's interesting, you both have to look up at it, and you're looking up into blue and purple and into those extraordinary words of his. Master said that he wished everybody would memorize his poem Samadhi and say it every day. Memorize it. Energy heals. If we're sitting and we're reading Samadhi and we're using that as a focal point of our day every day, I never come in here without reading 3 or 4 of these. It's not like reading the whole poem, which is on the wall back there, by the way. But it's a remarkable way to continuously lift our energy up. Okay, I'm going to stop right now. Who has any questions or comments for Connie, myself? Just tell a story, anything that you want to say or ask about?
Just how you were talking about how important it is to constantly remind ourselves that we are these bodies of energy constantly sending out to the world. And because these teachings can be quite subtle, it can seem pretty hard to find ways to remind ourselves. But once we open ourselves up, even in the littlest of ways to receive them, they can come to us in much more profound ways. And I remember one of my first times at Ananda Village, sitting out by Lotus Lake and just seeing this duck on the pond there on the lake. And it must have been his feet just waddling underwater, but the waves, the ripples of waves just continued to go out. And it was the environment there, the state of mind I was in, but it hit me so profoundly that that's what we are. We don't necessarily see the ripples going out from us, but in essence, it put these subtle teachings into a form that really stuck with me, that we're constantly have these ripples coming out from us of energy. And because of that, once we sort of open ourselves up to look for reminders, they come to us much more easily, and we don't have to feel such a struggle of trying to remind ourselves of this idea that we are energy. It's so profound, and it's one of those things that's going to stick with me, for the rest of my life. And it's just opening ourselves up to remembering that.
It's such a beautiful image, Vinny. I really appreciate that you shared that, because it's that kind of subtle. And the other thing that you said that I'd like to comment on, one of the things I wanted to talk about tonight, and I forgot to, but I'll get back to it next week or the week after in some way, is this whole notion of change, which is really something that you're hitting on, and how hard it is to change. There's that wonderful quote, "Change is not made without inconvenience, even from worse to better." I mean, it's an amazing line. It's hard to change, and you're saying once we are willing, last week we talked about awareness. We need to have the awareness, and we are willing, so we open up and say, show me, teach me, let me see. Suddenly, you're sitting in front of that beautiful lake, and you see, and a whole lesson comes to you because you were ready for it, which is, I know what you were saying. So both the visual image that Vinny's giving us as the ripples, so how energy's going out, and we can feel it. Look, it's subtle, and yet it's profound. It's a beautiful image, and it really does bring up, what does it mean for us to choose to grow, to choose to change, even when we have no idea what that's going to look like, and how much, without realizing it, we could be resisting it. So if we stay conscious of what Vinny's sharing with us, of just opening, allowing new ideas, new thoughts, new music, new places, even just share a minute of Vinny's story. Vinny lived in North or South Carolina. It doesn't matter. He found Ananda online, and he watched Ananda online for a year. He watched people at the village. He watched people here. He knew all of us. We never heard of him. He didn't call. He didn't write. He didn't come. He's just back there, but it's so amazing. And then this extraordinary courage. He just picked himself up one day and moved here. I mean, he appeared here. It's the most remarkable story, really. But then he could talk to us, totally our language, totally energetically attuned, even before he arrived here, which is so amazing. But that kind of willingness, that's grace, that kind of awareness to say, okay, that's it, I got it, I feel it, I'm going there, without having any idea of what was going to be happening. The spiritual path takes courage. It really does. And that's a beautiful example of it. Anybody else have a comment to make, or a story to tell, or a question? Yes, Bethany. Hold on for 1 minute. Let Vinny bring you this. It's on. You just have to hold it close to your mouth. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, there.
I'm sorry.
So I know in psychology, they will say that there's this sort of a cliche saying that you have to love yourself in order to love someone else, or how can you love someone else if you don't love yourself? And so I was kind of thinking about that when you were saying that you could just see the Divine Mother in someone or everyone. And that's interesting because it's so different. Well, at least I heard it differently from the saying that the saying that I was just thinking about. Like, you have to love yourself before you can love someone else. But you're saying that you can just. Are you saying that you can just put your energy out in that way?
I'm saying that every little step we take in the right direction is huge progress. And ultimately, of course, once we remember who we are, then there's much more to give. Energy flows through us. We even quit feeling, we become simply a vehicle. But, you know, it would be like saying when somebody sits down to learn to play the piano and they're practicing and it sounds bad, that they should quit playing because they can't play a piano concerto yet. You know, you don't do that. If you quit practicing, how do you ever get there? So you have to practice, and it's hard, and you don't always make it, but you have a goal. So is the goal perfect love? Yes. And we'll see that even more clearly when we do the chakras next week. But we keep saying it. That is the goal. The goal is not to just be able to love somebody. The goal is to be love, which is very hard for the mind to get. But that was that beautiful story of Mari and her husband. When she said, we fell in love. I think they fell into love. They became love. It was remarkable, the healing that happened. But I think ultimately, see, people who say that, and did you say in psychology? I thought you said ecology. Yeah, you know, people speak from the mind because that's what they know. That's fine. But what we're here saying is we know we're setting our sights so beyond the mind. And we just have to keep moving there. So the further down the path we are, the more we have to share, the more perfectly energy flows through us. People feel love. They feel something different. They know something different is happening because we're getting ourselves, our little egoic selves, more and more and more out of the way. The perfect moments are when people feel less and less and less Shanti. When people are around and you're in somebody's presence and you say, I love being near them. What is this? It's probably not them. It's probably what's flowing through them. But that doesn't mean that we don't keep loving. And every time we succeed in remembering to look for God in everybody else, we grow. Every time even just remembering, never mind actually getting lost in somebody's eyes because we really do see Divine Mother looking back at us. Are we going to stay there and live there forever? Probably not. But boy, what a magnificent feeling. You remember last week we said, once something sacred happens in a place, it's a sacred place. It can't lose that. When it's really sacred, no matter what else happens, it will always be there. You know, and there's a story of when Master was walking up the stairs. Did you just tell that story last week? And he was in somebody's house on the East Coast, and he stopped, and he said, something wonderful happened here. And it turns out that the man whose house it was had right in that very spot, years and years ago, had a vision of Master. Right there. Master said, something wonderful happened here. So you see, every moment that we can, remember the divine. That's what we're doing. We're just finding ways to remind ourselves. We're wearing colors, we're listening to music, we're standing in front of a mirror and smiling, we're doing these affirmations. We're sitting here as much as we can. You know, we're coming to Sunday services. All these things, that's our goal. Until soon, everything coalesces and we're there. And we're there fully all the time. That beautiful book, The Practice of the Presence of God, Brother Lawrence, or Frank Laubach's book that I don't remember the name of right now, Letters from a Modern Mystic. These great saints who just practice thinking of God, practice thinking of God, practice, and they share their path with us until they reach that place where that's all they're thinking of. I'll tell you one more story before we stop along these lines. I don't know if any of you ever read the book Left to Tell. It's a remarkable book about the Rwandan Holocaust. I will warn you, it was one of the most inspiring books that I have ever read, but it is a hard book to read. So let me say that to you. It is very graphic about what was going on in Rwanda. It's called Left to Tell. And it's a story about a woman who was part of a family that was very well known, and she survived the Holocaust by hiding in a bathroom with 6 or 7 other women. Only one of them could sit down at a time for 3 months. And outside of the wall, she heard them capturing her family one by one and killing them. And that was a brutal war. They literally hacked people up into pieces. They cut your head open. I mean, literally, it was horrible. And she was listening to her, this brother that she was so close with. And she just started praying. She just started praying. And she would pray for minutes at first, and then hours. And then she describes for 3 days being constantly in prayer, just praying. She was Catholic. She was just calling on Jesus, calling on Jesus. And finally, Jesus appeared to her. And he came, and he, in essence, stayed with her throughout the 3 months. First she would try a minute, then a few minutes, then 10 minutes, then more and more. That's what we're all doing. Literally. I mean, Jesus then came, and she has beautiful, this is why I'm telling you it was so inspiring, from the worst situation in the world to really have Jesus come and hold you in his arms and carry you the rest of the way through this. And it never got easy. I mean, he basically told her, you will have to love everyone. These are all my children, he said to her again. So that's what we're all doing. We're all on our way to becoming great saints. And those of us who are here are just so blessed. We couldn't be here if we weren't pretty far down the path. But it's just moment by moment. We do the best we can. When we don't make it, we let it go. We bring ourselves back. We just keep trying. So if you remember, if everybody leaves here and remembers, yeah, Shanti said, every time I look in somebody's eyes, if you remember it once tomorrow, that's so beautiful. And that's just how we grow and what we do. Larry.
Just real quickly, something I heard a while back. It's simple, but it helped me. It's like what I focus on, I create more of. And so, if my attention is on, listening to talks about how to get truly well, or having pictures of the masters or somebody else I find inspiring in my house, hanging out with people who are trying to live kind of an uplifted life condition, if I'm thinking about, having an upraised consciousness, all those things are going to create more of that in me. If I'm even acting as if I love somebody that I don't care for, that's going to, and I'm doing it consistently and putting my thoughts and energy in that direction, that's going to create more of that for me. And if instead my focus is on, what can I do to get around the other guy in business to make money, then my consciousness is going to go there and everything that comes with it. So, it's a simple concept, but for me, it's kind of just helped me on my good days head in the right direction.
Absolutely. It is simple, but it's not easy. And it's a beautiful concept to remember. Where we focus our attention, that's where we go. And we have to remember that. That's why we keep saying, as often as you can, raise your eyes up. It makes a big difference. And all the things you're talking about. And, I happen to know that you live that beautifully. You make great efforts in these ways. You come to these classes, you go out of your way, you put yourself so you'll always be in the right place at the right time. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful practice. I really admire that in you. And you're a teacher in that way. So, thank you. Okay? Chakras next week? Thank you.